Every 3 years we go to the ballot box. We grab our pieces of paper, number the boxes, hopefully without any penises involved. And lo and behold, we've elected the next Prime Minister and the next government of Australia, who will hopefully do what's best for the people of Australia. But behind the scenes, there's something more sinister happening. There's a dark influence that infects our politicians and makes the decisions for them. So who really controls the government? Howdy, my name's Mitch, and today I'm going to be talking about the sinister force which influences our governments and corrupts our politics. It's the political donations and lobbying of the big corporations. And I'll just quickly say this topic is so big and so broad, I won't be able to fit it all into this video. But first of all, we live in a democracy, which I'm sure you know. What that means is basically we have power in our vote. We give that vote to the people who we elect, our elected representatives, to hopefully make decisions which best reflect what the people of Australia want, or what the majority of people in Australia want. We obviously don't agree on everything, but that's the good thing about a democracy is, the government who gets elected is what the majority of people want or the majority of people are happy to compromise on. So don't you think it's really, really annoying when the government then turns around and makes decisions and passes legislation which the majority of people do not want, and especially the majority of people who voted for them. And when you pull back the curtain a little bit more, you realise there's so much that our elected representatives and government could do to help people and benefit people, which they're not doing because of the influence of big corporations and the influence they're having over our politics, who, as it seems, are the real ones who are running our country. And most of it comes down to the lobbying of these corporations, the political donations of these big corporations to political parties, and the many other ways they have their influence over our politics and over how the country is run, basically, including offering ministers and politicians very well-paid, cushy jobs in their corporations for when they leave their role as office, which we'll get to. Every year, the major parties, Labor, the Liberals and the Nationals, take millions of dollars in donations from big corporations, and some of the most recognisable big corporations in Australia. Corporations like the big gas corporations, the supermarkets, the banks, and I'll just list a few of the examples here from 2024. There's so many, but here's a few, so bear with me. The Minerals Council of Australia, huge mining and fossil fuel lobby group, donated $8,000 to Labor. Not much at all, but a tiny amount to keep them on side a little bit. And $217,000 to the Liberals and Nationals combined. So we can see who's a real friend of one of Australia's biggest mining and fossil fuel lobby groups. Sportsbet, we all know Sportsbet. $88,000 to Labor and $60,000 to the Liberals. NAB, the bank, $66,000 to Labor and $76,500 to the Liberals and Nationals combined. Chevron, multinational oil and gas corporation, one of the world's biggest, $72,750 to Labor and $31,825 to the Liberals and Nationals. Do you think the big corporations would donate money like this to political parties without expecting something in return? Political parties aren't charities. They're political parties. They're trying to reach government to become the decision makers of the country. So these big corporations are donating money every year to try and get some of those decisions to benefit them. So this is just a tiny handful of examples of donations to the political parties, but there is donations from pretty much all the big banks, fossil fuel companies, insurance companies, gambling companies, property investors, you name it, they've probably donated to one of the major parties. Now, it's not as simple as saying that, this corporation donated this much money, which led to this law being passed. But it's not illegal for a company, a big corporation, to make donations to the major parties and then send their lobbyists in to lobby on behalf of the big corporations, and then see the decisions that are made and the legislation that is passed reflect what these companies want. So it's not as simple, as I said, it's not as simple as saying, here's the money, here's the law. But if you connect the dots, it's pretty much what's happening. And I've got a really good example right here with gambling ads. Surprisingly, Australians are some of the biggest losers in the world when it comes to gambling. Australians lose the most money in the entire world on gambling. So over the last few years, there's been a lot of debate and a lot of talk about how we rein this in and how we can fix this problem. And one of the biggest solutions that is on the table right now is banning gambling ads. A total ban on gambling ads. I'm sure that most people could get around a ban on gambling ads. If you aren't a gambler, then gambling ads aren't going to affect you whatsoever. But for the people who do gamble, gambling is tearing Australian families apart and is ruining people's lives. So it makes sense. But the government is still refusing to implement a ban on gambling ads. They've done a few things like put the little bit at the end of gambling ads that say you win some, you lose more. But they're not banning gambling ads, which people say is what is needed, basically. And coincidentally, they're also taking donations from a lot of the biggest gambling corporations and lobby groups, including Sportsbet, Tabcorp, and Responsible Wagering Australia. So some gambling companies and gambling lobby groups are donating to Labor, to the Labor Party who is in government. You'd think that a ban on gambling ads would be a sensible decision that the government could make. Gambling is harming Australians, a ban on gambling ads would be better for Australians, so the government, who is there to represent the people who voted them in, should make that decision. But it turns out, while gambling is bad for Australian people, gambling is good for gambling companies. And so gambling ads must also be good for gambling companies, because if it weren't, then why would they lobby hard against a ban on gambling ads? So gambling companies, 1, Australian people, 0. And then there's the lobbying. Now this might blow your mind a bit, but there is currently a 3-to-1 ratio of registered lobbyists to politicians in Canberra. So there's 3 times the amount of lobbyists than there are politicians in Canberra. In an ABC article from 2023, it said there are 227 members of Parliament compared to 705 lobbyists working for specialised firms. Now that's just the registered ones. There's also unregistered lobbyists, which there are a crap load of. According to Senator David Pocock, the independent senator, there's more than 1,500 people who currently hold sponsored passes, which grants them 24/7 access to all areas of Parliament House, and sometimes there's 2,000 passes. So that's about 2,500 people who have access to Parliament House, all areas of Parliament House, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to reach the decision makers of our country who hold the most power. Of course, some of these people who I would say are on the good side. There's people who have passes who work for organisations who are lobbying to get decisions to benefit the Australian people and to benefit nature. But most of them are not. Most of them are there representing big corporations like the banks, fossil fuel companies, mining companies, gambling companies. You know, there are thousands of people here, and they are there lobbying our politicians, seeking to get outcomes to best benefit what is best for these corporations, not what's best for the people of Australia. And the crazy thing is, we actually don't know who our representatives and our politicians are giving these passes to, because it's not required for them to be listed. And then the penalties for lobbyists who breach the lobbying code of conduct are so weak, it's almost a joke. But even then, they're not even being used. According to The Guardian, not a single lobbyist has been sanctioned under the federal government's Code of Conduct and Transparency rules for almost 3 years, despite more than a dozen breaches. So anyway, that's lobbying. There is so much to talk about, but I'll finish it up there. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is the revolving door. I won't go into it too much here, but this list of examples tells you everything you need to know. Mark McGowan, former WA Labor Premier, since being Premier has gone on to work for 5 different oil and gas or mining companies, including BHP, Mineral Resources and others. Ian Macfarlane, former Liberal Resources and Energy Minister, is now on the board of directors at Woodside, one of Australia's biggest gas companies, and was the CEO of major fossil fuel lobbying group, Queensland Resources Council. So he was the Resources Minister. Scott Morrison, former Liberal Prime Minister, is now on the advisory board of Dyne Maritime, which invests in technologies for AUKUS, which is the $360 billion nuclear submarine deal that he set up with the US and UK when he was the Prime Minister. Martin Ferguson was the Labor Resources and Energy Minister, has since been in multiple oil and gas company roles, including as chairman of the advisory board of Australian Energy Producers, one of Australia's most powerful lobby groups for oil and gas. And then aside from this, every resources minister since 2001 has gone on to work in the fossil fuel industry afterwards. Conflict of interest? These are people in some of our most powerful and privileged positions in our country, making decisions which affect everyone, which are meant to benefit the Australian people, which are then going on to work for some of the biggest corporations who are making record enormous amounts of profit, dodging tax and doing other dodgy things like getting our gas for free, polluting our oceans, and which are essentially burdening the Australian people, not benefiting the Australian people. Anyway, this is barely touching the surface. I could go on forever. I know there's so much more that needs to be talked about here. But I know there's a lot of people out there who believe that our government and politicians are controlled and influenced by some hidden force that we can't see, and it's all a bit of a conspiracy. Well, this is the hidden force. This is the dark influence on our politics. It's the big corporations who we all know through the lobbying, through the donations, and the other ways which they can have their influence because of the enormous amounts of wealth that these companies have, which they can use through advertising campaigns and misinformation campaigns and things like that. It's these corporations currently calling the shots. The important thing I want to say here, though, is that I know that it can make people feel powerless. You know, our politicians are being controlled by big corporations. Our politics essentially is corrupt. So what's the point of engaging and doing anything? Because they're not going to make decisions that reflect what the people want anyway. If we believe this, then we've already lost. If we believe that there's no point doing anything because politics is corrupt, then we give our politicians and these corporations all of our power. We strip ourselves of our power, which I said at the start, we have. And it's more, our power is in more than just our vote. We should be exercising our power through speaking up, through holding our governments to account, which comes in so many forms. But essentially, the reason we have to stay engaged and stay active and keep speaking up is because currently the big corporations are having more influence over our politics than we are. The good news is that there are some people on the inside working to change this. Some of the independents and the Greens are fighting to reform and get stronger lobbying regulations, get better transparency, get reform on political donations. And also the Greens refuse to take any donations from big corporations. So to answer the question, who really runs the country, who really controls our politicians? At the moment, it's the big corporations with their lobbying and donations. But we can change that. Don't ever forget that we, the people, hold the power in society. People power is strong. So when we come together and build a movement for change, we can make change. Share this video. Tell your friends and family at just how bad this is. We'll build a movement to end this political corruption, and we'll build a politics that works for the people and the planet. So get involved and help make it happen. Cheers.